I would like to start with a reading. Many of the things we need can wait. The child cannot wait. Right now is the time his bones are being formed, his blood is being made, and his senses are being developed. To him, we cannot answer tomorrow. His name is today. And that was written by Gabriella Mistral. And I thought it was very key when we're talking about health and elders and mental health, that we give ourselves a reminder that this is not so much about us, but for the people that are coming up behind us, learners of all ages, lifelong learners. So with the thought of keeping child first, I'd like to start with a bit of a story. Back about a year ago now, in March of 2020, I believe it was, when Chief Pasqua Education Center found it necessary due to the pandemic to close our face-to-face instruction and move to a virtual hybrid model. We are very aware at Pasqua First Nation about the need for holistic and balanced approaches. So our cultural leaders, including elected people, community, nation people, elders, and knowledge keepers, organized a ceremony down at the lake. Now our nation, located in Treaty 4, is in the beautiful Pal Valley, and much of our nation is on top the hill of the valley, but our land also goes down to the lake, to Pasqua Lake, it's named, and we have ceremonial areas, Powwow Arbor, down at the lake. And so I was privileged enough to be one of about 100 people that were taking part in ceremony that was led by the elders of our nation and others from other nations who our knowledge keepers had asked to join us. And what the whole purpose was is to provide some support and some guidance as we, as adults from many departments on our nation, education, health, public works, transportation, health center, we were all involved with the pandemic response. We have about 200 students, pre-K to grade 12, registered at our school. So every household on our nation, on our reserve, was affected by the pandemic education approach that we have to adopt. So what happened is we were having a discussion. And what that discussion was about is, how can we talk about the pandemic? Do we call it COVID-19? Do we say the plague? Do we say the pandemic? Do we say the scary monster? And we knew that the words that we used, because linguistics are so important and the message that they convey, we did not want to create a sense of panic. We had to be calm, keep our heads level, and be very thoughtful. So one of the first metaphors that we used was that of tigers. Big, saber-toothed, monstrous, muscled up tigers, must be from the neighboring reserve, we said, are now loose on our nation. These tigers are prowling around Pasqua First Nation. What is our response? What do we do? So we said this to our parents. What do we do when there's a danger, when there's people eating tigers on the nation? And what they said is, well, the tigers are outside. We'd keep our children and our people inside the house. And then we'd say, but the tigers aren't going anywhere, and those tigers are very hungry. We quickly realized that what our actions had to be is not to hide or to flee from the tigers, but to make sure that we all knew how to live with those tigers. There was a joke being made about, if you're getting chased by a hungry tiger, you only have to run faster than one other person to not be that victim of that tiger. But that conversation about not running from the pandemic or holding a great fear towards the pandemic, but to see it as something that was a danger, hopefully a temporary danger, that had to be responded to. Everybody could relate. because we were able to carry that metaphor beyond there's tigers on the nation and they're hungry to the tigers are going to be here for a while. How are we going to live with them? How are we going to protect ourselves from them? What will we do for each other? Can we tame those tigers? Can we feed those tigers some other kind of meat so they don't want us? And so it started our creative journey in discussing how our nation would be led by our cultural people in addressing the current pandemic. The tigers on the nation were going to be befriended by us, and we were going to work together with them. So the power of metaphor is something that I've learned over 6 decades of life as being very characteristic of most of the conversations that I have with elders or knowledge keepers or other Indigenous ancestry role models. The oral tradition is so strong. Here I am talking to you and sharing some stories and experiences. I was given the offer that I could use extra technology, do a Prezi presentation, do a PowerPoint presentation. But what I decided to do for simplicity is just to speak the way that the elders and the old people spoke to us. So there is a great contrast between Western science and the Cartesian idea that non-human organisms
Oh, these
can
guys
be
are 2
regarded
hours behind.
as machines. Gianna, you're have to go on mute, please, or we'll compete.
Oh, shoot.
That's okay. So we have to contrast Western science and Cartesian idea that non-human organisms can be regarded as machines. I think that was one of the first things that we started talking about when we were looking at metaphor to understand how we could use metaphor to approach our pandemic response. The Great Spirit teaches that birds are taught how to make nests and that those birds are different sizes, different needs. So their nests are different. That's how we can learn from Mother Nature about the pandemic response, is it's not one response for every nation that's going to be effective, just like it's not one nest for every bird that's going to be effective. What our job was at Pasqua First Nation is to figure out why the Great Spirit did make us different and to understand and to truly believe that we're each placed here to be an independent individual to explore our gifts. And the reason that that is important is because if we think of what is the purpose of education from most Indigenous traditions, it's based on the understanding that we are all born with gifts and that the purpose of people in our circle, first our mothers and fathers and our family members, and then later on our teachers, is to help us to polish up that gift and to discover that gift. So we have to be very aware of the contrast between our Indigenous ways and Western science or mainstream ways. When we thought about creating our pandemic response for our First Nation, of course, communication was key. We had to understand that because our buildings, we have 3 different buildings, they're in fairly close geographical area, but if we receive a call about contact tracing for a grade 3 student, we have to be able to figure out if that grade 3 student has been over at the high school, or did they go over to the Little Pelican Lodge, or what were they with that group down at Asham's Beach for land-based learning. So that's the reason communication strategies that are deliberately set are so critical in everybody's pandemic response, because what is behind that communication is the relationships that are built. When we greet each other, how are you doing? Are you hanging in there? Is there anything you need help with? When we talk like that to people that we work with under these very stressful situations, we are building relationships. And I have to admit, of about 140 employees at Pasqua First Nation, there are several that previous to the pandemic I had never spoken to. Maybe I waved at them or, greeted them, but I never really knew people. So what the pandemic has done through our communication strategies is it's brought all of our departments together. We have hired an IT technician. We've cleaned up our emails. We all have common emails, simple things like email contact lists, phone trees for emergency phone calls. All of that has to be developed. So communication that builds relationships is so essential for collaboration. So if you haven't made a communication strategy or a communication plan, either formal or informal, that would be one of the first things that, based on our experience, that we would recommend. The next area is about goal setting. In Indigenous traditions, there are two main metaphors that come up all over the world. And one is the journey. The other metaphor is the quaternity, the circle with the cross in the middle. And so what we did using our goal setting to make it be individually and collectively relevant and to reflect our Soto Cree perspectives is we, of course, use the holistic approach and incorporated within our plan and our goals where we want to be in our mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual worlds. So for example, when we were first closed down and we found ourselves in virtual learning, we did not want to give up the advances in the relationships we had built over ceremony, especially seasonal ceremonies. So we figured out a way to hold our spring, our summer, and our fall feasts in a physically distanced way, in a respectful cultural way, and we proceeded with that. What it did for us is it made us feel more balanced when we knew that we were respecting our spiritual roots, and our spiritual guidance is what affected not only our minds, but our hearts as we were planning forward. So when we look at honoring resiliency and change and hope as the foundation of that resiliency, I unfortunately am not a language speaker in my Soto Knockaway language. I am learning. And I went to our language teacher. Her name is Denise Kennedy. And I went to Denise on the topic of hope. I wanted to learn how to say the Knockaway or the Soto word for hope. And so she thought a bit. She said, I have to think about this one. And I thought, oh, that's different, because usually Denise answers right away. And what she did is she had to check with her mom, Cecile. And what she told me is that in the Soto Knockaway language, there is not a noun for the word hope. There is not a word for the word, there is not a term for the word hope. What there is in Soto Knockaway language is that hope is never described alone. Hope is always described in the Soto language as a verb or an action. So what that means is you have to hold hope and behave hopefully and expect hopeful outcomes in order for hope to come alive. So that phrase, pardon my pronunciation, in Knockaway, Izi Bakwa Sein Daming. And so the process of having hope is the only way that we can act on the basis of hope in all of our interactions. Hope is deeper than just simple optimism. Hope is more mysterious, delicate, and elusive. Hope is a feeling we must develop and cultivate. But like faith, hope is also a state with which we are graced. Hope is grace. Hope fosters our determination and our grit. It's the ability that we are given to bounce back or be resiliency, and to remain determined despite failure or setbacks. Hope is essential. And while I'm on the topic of definitions, I want to go to resilience. From the perspective of materials science, the definition of resiliency is the ability of something to return to its original form after being bent. From psychology and psychiatry, the description of resilience describes individuals' capacities to achieve well-being and thrive despite individuals' capacities. The definition of resiliency from ecology perspective is that it draws our attention to the ability of ecosystems to adapt to environmental stress through transformation. So the ecosystems that we're in show resilience in three broad ways. Hope allows us to buffer the disturbances to reduce their impact. So when we hold hope, when we are faced with a pandemic, what that allows to do is to buffer that disturbance to all of our systems. Hope is essential. The second thing that is affected is we need to self-organize to maintain all of our system functions. Because school closed down, there were parents that were working parents that didn't have childcare arrangements in order to continue with their jobs because their children were at home and now needed some assistance with getting online. So one action caused other reactions, and we had to deal with all of them. And then the third area is in learning or adaptation. And that's where our Indigenous values and perspectives of emphasis on interconnectedness, integration, and wholeness provide us with balance. So another story. I want to take you back to that beautiful Asham's Beach at Pasqua Lake in the Quapaw Valley. Early spring celebration, we're down at the lake. Teepees and lodges are built. You can smell the smoke in the air. You can hear the laughter. People are happy. I'm a director of education for 2 years at my home nation, and after a career of 34 years, I had never seen anything like the pandemic and what it did. I have to admit, I had some fear. I had some doubt. I was afraid, what if a child gets sick at school and takes it home to an elderly, sickly grandparent and there's a bad outcome? What will I do? I was very, very afraid. But in my role as director, I found that it was not appropriate to express or show that fear at all. So that's what I decided at that ceremonial place that I needed to seek some answers for. So I took my cloth and my tobacco and my offerings into one of the teepees. I chose one of the elders to speak to. I sat beside him and I told him my story. I said, I'm scared. I can't mess up. The stakes are too high. And he asked me to describe what that fear was. He asked me to express how I felt about the fear that I had. And what he did is something that changed my response and influenced our whole nation's response. Because what he did is he said, my girl, we're not to fear the pandemic. We're to respect it. We're to respect the COVID-19 virus. And I thought, oh my goodness, how can we respect this enemy? And then the conversation that led from that came from our Indigenous past, the traditions, the oral traditions of many generations before. And when we face our fears, and we face the virus with respect, our response is going to be different. Western science talks to us about brain development. And when we're in a fear mode, fight, flight, or freeze, we respond in a different way than when we're calmer and respectful and reflective and contemplative. So that was very, very important. Hope is one of our grandfather teachings and a common value through the teepee teachings and all of the other value teachings that go on. Perspective is important then, having respect for the virus and not fearing it. When we look at life from a different perspective, it makes us realize that it's not the deer that is crossing the road. Rather, it's the road that's crossing the forest. So hope. How can we find hope amid all of the uncertainty? Hope takes many forms. Hope is an open road. Hope is an unturned page. Hope is 5 minutes of sunshine and a cup of iced tea outside. Hope is many things. Lee Miracle and her two daughters in 2019 published a book. It's called Hope Matters. Lee Miracle's daughters are Kalampa Bob and Tanya Carter. And I'd like to read you an excerpt from their book about hope. Hope breathes life inside those shadowy crevices where doubt waits to feast on our weakened and dimmed inner light. Hope gives us strength to trudge through the muck and the mire to find solid ground. Hope is the home of curiosity, imagination, intelligence, and compassion. Hope frees, hope relieves, hope moves us from inspiration to action and direct hope to our new reality. Hope is so important. Emily Dickinson, back in the day, I don't have the year, she wrote a poem, and I've had this near my desk for many years. Hope is the thing with feathers that perches on the soul and sings the tune without words and never stops at all. So the purpose of my emphasis on hope and my encouragement to you is to seek out within yourself that which allows you to build hope, respect over fear, trusting, building relationships with people that can take us from where we are right now into a different place. Hope is the foundation of resiliency. Allow me to give an example of another metaphor, the metaphor of a foundation, say for a house, a big building. We need to be grounded in our foundation. That is our emotional intelligence, is that grounding. Our foundation of who we are and what we give out to the world is foundation, our emotions, including hope. Let's imagine for a moment that this is a brick foundation that we're building. Every single brick or brick block is building towards that goal achievement of building a sound foundation. At Pasqua First Nation, Chief Pasqua Education Center, some of the bricks in our foundation in honoring hope as a foundation for building resiliency is number one, was our assertion of our treaty inherent and human right to education. Nothing is going to take it away. Cultural genocide, battles that we've had over the last 500 years, our assertion of our treaty and inherent right to education allows us to rise up over the health of a global pandemic. Our other brick is knowing every child at our school and our nation by name and by need, and by working together with other departments. If your foundation for your pandemic response does not include including knowing each child by need and by name, you might gloss together many different needs and end up only meeting the needs of some of your children and youth and not all of them. So please try to use individualized education plans, or as we do at our nation, we have bundles or portfolios for all of our students where we track what their needs are. We also, when we're building a foundation, we have to know where to place the strong bricks. And I'm not a construction girl, but I think that the strong corner bricks are very substantial. And so think ahead for your nation. Who are the cornerstones of your nation? For us, our elders, our knowledge keepers, our leaders, our elected leaders, our parents, and our children and our youth. as well as the spirits of all the living things that are near us, protecting us, including the sun, the moon, the stars, the animals, the plants, the water, the air. So our strong bricks will allow us to build a very strong foundation. And the glue that's going to let us stick together to support students is our love. So the foundation that we build for our COVID-19 response needs a strong foundation. And if we think of the mortar as the glue that holds all of us together, then what that is that the glue is made out of love. And that value of love will carry us through. I have some bricks in my foundation, my personal wellness and trying to be healthy, my people, my four-legged friends, prayer, mindfulness, patience, learning to hold my tongue and watch my tone, and my desire to make a positive difference. And although 45 minutes doesn't allow us to workshop this, what I'd like you to do is just to spend a moment thinking, what are the bricks of your foundation? What do you need to be grounded? And what do you need to be supported in the work that you do? And if you just spend a moment, maybe there's a chipped up brick that you have there that maybe we have to replace, or maybe you have to find a way to mend it. But do not underestimate the importance of your personal wellness affecting your ability to remain hopeful with that positive attitude. So please think, what are some of the bricks of your wellness foundation? So as we worked at Pasqua First Nations Education Authority, we were affected by the holistic approach. And how we looked at the holistic approach, mental, emotional, physical, spiritual, was as a house of 4 rooms. And individually and collectively, we made an effort, a deliberate effort, to make sure we stood in each of those 4 rooms of our house every single day and in consideration when we were making important decisions. So we would stand in the mental intellectual house and we would do the brain work. Have we remembered this? Do we have a checklist? Do we know how to do this? We would move to the spiritual room and see, have we made the appropriate offerings? Have we asked for this, the exact help that we are seeking from Great Spirit and from other helpers in our area? Have we spent time in the emotional room to think about how this decision that we were making might affect people? And last but not least is our physical response. How do we reach out and build positive relationships through physical distancing? So that visualization of a circular house with 4 rooms is an important part of your pandemic response. We spend time in every room every day and in consideration of every decision. And what one of our knowledge keepers pointed out to us, when we are collaborating together and we're building ourselves up with hope and faith and positive thinking, when we come together through our pandemic response in our mental room, we have to think about our self-concept. What is it that I think of myself and my ability to respond to this situation? In our emotional room, what is my self-esteem? How do I feel about the current situation? Am I scared? Am I fearful? Or am I ready to respect and move on with resilience? What is my physical development? What is my self-determination? What am I doing about my current situation? And then last, my spiritual. When we stand in that spiritual place, is that where we get our inspiration? Yes. And that's also the place that we realize that we never walk alone. I have another reading for you from S.C. Lowry. And this is my encouragement to you as you were thinking about the bricks in your own foundation. My encouragement. This one inspired me because I had a birthday this month and my much younger sister sent me a song by Katy Perry. And I didn't even know who Katy Perry was really. I thought she was a girl with nice colored hair, but then it kept changing. But she has a song that has the words, "This girl is on fire." And it was such an inspiration because my younger sister was kind of teasing me about being the old fuddy-duddy. And she was encouraging me to set myself on fire and not to act like such an old lady. So here's what I have for you. We have different genders on this call, and this one refers to the feminine gender, but we can all find our way to fit in. Be the one with fire in her eyes and oceans in her heart. Be the one with diamonds in her smile and the winds in her voice. Be the one with adventures in her soul and laughter in her spirit. Be the one with freedom in her wings and a beautiful wild forest in her mind. Be you and totally you, and you won't even have to try. All of this will just ooze from you. Be you and totally you, and you will realize you are so much more. So I offer that to an encouragement to all of us as leaders and as adults during this very tough time. I'm mindful of time, and I just skipped a couple of pages there. So I have about 2 or 3 more statements to make in the next 10 minutes. And it is something that I mentioned on the panel this morning, if people were able to tune into that. And I think it's important about understanding hope as a foundation of resiliency. So what I've tried to do so far in this presentation is offer some reflections on the definition of hope and resiliency, offer some perspectives about what we've done at Pasqua First Nation to build a foundation for our pandemic response that is holistic and very steeped in our culture and language and ceremonial ways. The next thing that I think is important as a name of this national gathering is to be champions. And I had a chuckle this morning about the lack of Stanley Cup wins for a certain Canadian team in the middle of Canada that doesn't win Stanley Cup very often. They don't have a trophy. Maybe they're not champions. Maybe we don't all walk around with Superman capes or Batgirl belts or Wonder Woman cobwebs, whatever it is that she has. But what we are is we are all champions, all of us, everybody. The caretaker in our school took special training to learn how to sanitize, to learn how to use a fogger, to learn which products could be used on our sugar cubes that surround our children. They're plexiglass and they have their own little bubble at the school. Everybody is reaching out to be a champion in their own areas of their responsibility. And so as a leader or as somebody that influence over human resources within your organization, please understand that a teaching that we have received, and I bet it's similar to where you are located, is that people grow best on the basis of strength. We need people to grow and to flourish during this tough time. If we are critical, if we say you shouldn't have done that, if we appear judgmental, if we are not aware of the tone that we use to instruct our colleagues, or if we are not aware of the faces that we might make when we're being taught, that is not helpful. People grow best on the basis of strength. So when we gather to talk about ongoing elements of our pandemic plan, we always start with the words, so what's working well? What's working well? And then we go to what could be even better if, and then we go to what isn't working at all. But we always start with, on that strength basis, what is working. And it's really important during the pandemic. In Saskatchewan, I've heard that we had 10 deaths yesterday, and that is very frightening. We have the Army into Saskatchewan helping us at our hospitals. We're sending ICU patients out to other provinces. It's quite frightening what's happening with the system. But with that fright, we do have the respect that people within the system, both on reserve and off reserve, our provincial colleagues, that we're all doing the best that we can. and we are operating on the basis of strength of what works. An example of that is the staff of Chief Pasqua Education Center have created a new group. It's called Collaboration Crew, and we have just-in-time workshops at any time that we need them. And unfortunately, last week, we needed a reminder about child abuse protocol and our duty to report. So in the middle of a pandemic and contact tracing and buses being canceled, we had to bring in a reminder about the duty to consult for something that was a reality with 2 of our students. And so without having a strength-based, hope-based approach, we could have been sort of brought down by the seriousness of the other things that are still going on despite pandemic response seeming to take up so much of our time. I'm reminded of something related to our collaboration crew. Ships don't sink because of the water around them. Ships sink because of the water that gets in them. Don't let what's happening around you get inside you and weigh you down. So another point of wellness for all of us. So all of this starts with you and me. Hope is the foundation of resiliency. It starts with you and me envisioning the future that we want to build for our children. And a couple of weeks ago, I participated in the First Nations Education Administrative Association professional development session. And one of the topics was 7 generations thinking. And I had been schooled for the last 30 years in a very Western strategic development approach when planning. You do your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats, and then you describe outcomes and you make task lists. Who's going to do that? What a learning that I've had during the pandemic is to supersede that Western experience with planning and immediately insert the Indigenous perspectives about planning 7 generations out. So that was a big learning that I have. And besides the scope of this presentation, I wouldn't be able to go into great detail about that. But what I would like to say is that our strategic planning regarding the pandemic has been scoped out for 140 years into the future at Chief Pasqua Education. It's not about what's going to happen when the 5 to 11-year-olds are vaccinated. It's looking at their great-grandchildren. And so I find comfort in following the traditions of planning for 7 generations and for the positivity that is included within that planning approach. People matter. We have to believe and have hope that we can all achieve individually, that our homes and our families can grow and learn, that our shared space can be better informed, and that we'll come together as a group of people, as a nation, as we face those tigers in the street. We're not afraid. We're going to respect them. We're going to learn how to live with them and how to keep on polishing the gift of the children and youth that we work with so that they can achieve their highest potential.
We have 5 minutes, Maureen.
Thank you. So between stimulus and response, so COVID-19 came, that's the stimulus. The response is we need a pandemic plan. There's a space there. In between the stimulus and the response, there's this space in the middle. And that's where we are. We are there individually, collectively, and as a people, as a human race. And between that stimulus and response is our power to choose what our response is. In our response lies our growth and our freedom. The last thing I want to share with you is a teaching that has been informed by many people, mainly knowledge keepers and some education professionals. And so what we are managing through the pandemic response, looking at hope as the foundation of resiliency, it's very complex. And there are needs to have a vision, skills, incentives, resources, and an action plan to change. And the change we want is we want to be respectful and aware of how to be protected, and continue with education. That's the change. But what happens if we don't have a vision? What if we are so panicked and running for internet connectivity and home learning packages that we forget to set that vision to make sure we're on the same page? Well, then it will result in confusion. Change without a vision results in confusion. What if we do not have the skills required to manage the complex change that is required? What if we lack skills? What if we don't have an IT professional to get our laptops up and running? What if we have untrained teachers not knowing how to deal with special education students that are uncomfortable in our protection bubbles? What do we do? If we don't have skills, we will have anxiety. So if you're feeling some anxiety, it could be that part of our team, part of our collaboration crew, or us might have some skill development to do. In considering that change, what if we don't have incentives? What if, there are no incentives? And I'm not talking about a paycheck or prizes. What I'm talking about is meaningful results and quality of life for the children and youth of our nation. Well, then we'll only have gradual change. And we can't slow down the pace of educational growth because of the pandemic. So we would only have gradual change if we don't have incentives. We will have frustration if we do not have resources. So if we do management of complex change and understand the parts are vision, skills, incentives, resources, and action plan, we're feeling frustrated, the reason may be a lack of resources. And finally, what if we don't have an action plan? What if we have a vision of where we want to be, what the outcomes are? We've skill development and professional development that's happening. We've offered incentives. We have resources. We will have false starts. We need an action plan. And what I'm willing to do as a result of being honored to be invited for this presentation is I'm willing to share our toolkit. We have created a virtual binder and a real tactile binder of task sheets. What to do if students in grade 3 are identified in contact tracing. What to do if, and every single situation that educators at a school can be faced with, we have a task sheet written that explains the vision, skills, incentives, resources, and action plan required. And I'd be willing to share that and to have a dialogue with other people to share the resources that we have. In closing, please remember you matter, people matter. Believe and have hope that we can achieve individually. And always remember that hope is not a noun. Hope is an action word. And I hope in some small way that I've been able to express to you, the participants of this session, some of the thoughts that I've gathered since I've been invited to do this presentation. And I hope I've honored the teachings of the knowledge keepers and elders, including my late parents, Tommy and Josie Johns. Thank you.
Thank you, Claire, and thank you, Maureen Johns, writing notes here, and a lot of good information, especially for our folks that are, I say, in the trenches. I was in the trenches myself for a number of years. I've been involved in Aboriginal education for over 34 years on all the different levels. So it is so important to have that information, and sometimes it's a validation, sometimes it's creating a better understanding. But most of all, it's the FNEAA for this work. We say, like Maureen said, work for us, it's a noun, it's not a verb. And the work that we do, and this is a work. And for us, what sets us apart, I really believe, is our connection to spirit, our traditions, our ceremonies. So the work that we do, it's sacred. And it's not even about us at this particular time. It is about our children and our grandchildren. We're always thinking into the future. And bottom line, our elders told us, you're responsible to ensure that those in 7 generations enjoy what we enjoy today. And that's everything, our resources, um, how we look after one another, maintaining our traditions. And I had that finger shaken at me saying, we're not allowed to change anything when it comes to our ceremonies, that is. When it comes to how we present and we say our work, our sacred work. So thank you so much for that. I really appreciate it. The way you presented it and weaving our traditions into today, our reality today. And the elders, of course, coined that as they say you're rich when you're hanging on both sides, holding on both sides, hanging on to our traditions and being able to walk in this world that we live in today, carrying the best of both worlds. With that, I'm going to ask everybody just to close their eyes. Make sure your feet are flat on the floor. And I just want you to think about where you see yourself in 1 year. And what are you doing? And where are you? And I thank each one of you for participating because it is so important to understand that what you say and do today, you're creating your future. Because it's a thought at first, then you speak the words, and then you follow by action. So it's so important, the elders would say, be careful, be careful. And of course, many of our traditions, many of our teachings come from our oral tradition. For most First Nations, it's certainly true for us here in Stolo. We say Stolo. It's a contemporary term to address all our First Nations. There's 24 different nations here in what they call Stolo territory. It mirrors the Fraser Valley. In here we have 2 terms, Shwoyan and Squawka, 2 types of stories. And Shwoyan talks about our creation stories. And Squawka talks about true stories. And the first lesson you learn is to listen. But my grandmother told me, don't just listen here, rather listen here and here. And she touches her ears and her heart. That's when you're truly listening. And it's so important because years and years ago, it meant life or death. If you didn't know how to listen, because what they said to you could is the teachings they gave to you is it can be a life or death. And so you zoom that up to today with this last year and a half, going on 2 years of COVID now. And COVID has accelerated as well to the variant, the Delta variant, which is more dangerous and more contagious. And I know in Europe, I think it's England where they're looking at another variant stronger than the Delta variant. So that whole notion of listening is so important. And we have, tell people to think about this. We have an oral tradition. It's the spoken word. We didn't have the written system in our here for our people. Yet we're nonverbal. Go figure that one. The less said, the better. And my grandfather told me, you know, people that get hit, you'll see a wound, a cut or a bruise, and then you'll see the body heal. He said, but people that are hit with words, it goes on their soul and makes them sick. So sometimes words can do more damage. So again, learning how to speak. And I can tell you that working in our education department and working with our language and bringing our language back to our families and our communities was not an easy task. And a majority of our children here in Stoller Territory attend the public school system. 70% of them attend the public school system. So I wanted to get our language at least into the school system here. And the elders were against it. And some of them shared their real feelings. And I wanted it in the university as well. And anyway, a couple of the elders said, I don't want white people speaking our language. I was beaten for that. I don't want white people speaking their language, and I can't speak it. I lost it. And when you're standing in front of the dear elders, you know, what do you say, right? And of course, I'm related to all of them. And I looked at them and I said, you know, right now our language is considered a second language. Our language should be the first language, not the second language. Everybody in Stoller Territory should be speaking Hakamilam. Built in our language is respect and kindness. Wouldn't that be nice? And they looked at me and they agreed. And they said, get our language in the schools, right? So our way of thinking is very different. Our language isn't just translated word for word.
Did you go down?
Well,
No.
I went down and turned it on, but I
Got
didn't want that.
Governance advisor
Watch it stop screen.
have to turn their microphone off. That's okay. So the whole thought process, and I know it's something that I struggled with when I went to university. I could, I had the thoughts and I could think in my language, in my tradition, but I could not write. And I think a lot of our people are like that. You have a difficult time when it comes to putting pen to paper. And it wasn't until I heard in a university professor explain how we think differently, how we do things differently. Our thought process is different. But he also said you could make that switch and that change. He said anybody can learn to write like this, and you can. So, what you say and how you think is so important, and that we create our future. And I tell people, I think we've been through enough now. I think we've been through enough. Let's create a better future. And we have another notion. That's why I asked you to close your eyes. Let's create a future. And it was actually Sitting Bull when I graduated a number of years ago from university. And I spoke at the first Indigenous conference, World Conference. And I was in graduating. I was a student. And I ended my session with Chief Sitting Bull's words. And he said, let's put our minds and our hearts together to create a future for our children. So that notion of your mind, that notion of your heart, and what I've learned is this, is words are food for your mind, as prayer is food for your spirit, as food is food for your body. And it's those things, that balance that we need to stay that notion of home tamat, that home, having a strong mind and a strong heart to swallowing with good feelings. And that's really what helped, certainly helped our family. So our two main stories of Shohwayam, our creation stories, and our Squalquel, we say true stories. There are true stories. And I really wanted families to know, because I know there's still folks out there, and we're getting to see glimpses of it now, of folks out there that have not had the vaccine yet. And that certainly hurts my feelings. I have friends and colleagues who are shared that, there's splits in their family because their daughters won't get COVID vaccine. Another good friend, his son won't get the vaccine. And it makes me wonder who they're listening to. And it's true, it's fear. I know that nagging fear is there. And what's something, the fear isn't even really for me, but for my children and my grandchildren, for my husband. And I can tell you that it's real. But the opposite of fear is courage. And it takes courage. Our elders would say, you stand up now. You stand up tall. And you keep your eyes down out of respect. You don't keep your head down because you don't know what you're walking into, but you keep your eyes down out of respect for your parents and your grandparents. So I want you to know that we did everything we were supposed to, my family. And we had COVID in January, 3 weeks shy of the vaccine. 3 weeks shy to the day of the vaccine coming to us. And it is everything that the authorities shared, the images in the hospitals. And you know, it humbles you to no end. It humbles you to no end. And it hits you like a brick. It truly does hit you like a brick. It just brings you to your knees. And I was on my knees. It makes you that weak. And it just my husband and I in our home. And he was the one that we were trying to protect because he has underlying health conditions. And then his symptoms hit him a day after the symptoms hit me. And it makes you so weak, honest to God. When I realized I had COVID, I stripped my bed. I stripped his bed. I went around and I sanitized everything, washed our bedding, masked up, wore gloves. But I can tell you, in just 12 hours, when I went to strip the bed the second day, it took me a half hour just to get the bedding off the bed. And I'd have to sit down. And then I'd drag the sheets down, drag the bedding down the stairs. And the next day was even worse. And I'd have to keep sitting down. And at the top of the stairs on the third day, I just threw the dang bedding down the stairs. But the worst part was having to phone the ambulance for my husband. And I did not want to do that. By then, my niece, who's a nurse, and my daughter, they masked up and gowned up because my doctor advised we both go to the hospital. And they were begging me to call the ambulance. And I'm being very honest here because I did not want to call the ambulance. I told him, why should I send my husband to a hospital that has no respect for our people? He'll be mistreated there. But my niece said she would call ahead and make sure. But I had no trust. But when I went in to see my husband, I knew I had no choice. But I wouldn't go. I wouldn't go. And that's being very honest because we're not treated good. And the report that came out just validated all of that. We know that. We know that. But I can tell you how we survived. I really believe about resilience and change. You know, my grandmother I went to see her one time because working in Aboriginal education, with non-First Nations for over 30 years, you get used to all their questions and comments, some good and some not good. But I just learned to have a better understanding and being able to answer those questions. And I welcome them. I welcome them. Anyway, this one student, graduate student, said to me, well, you can't go back to the way you used to live. So what do your people want? And I looked at that student and I said, well, first of all, how about respect? But second, yes, we cannot go back. As much as we'd like to, I'd love to live in a longhouse again. I said, but our people aren't afraid of change. My grandmother said her grandmother was the first one to trade a pot, trade one of their baskets for a metal pot. And she said, we changed with the Ice Age. We changed with the flood. We're not afraid of change. And I know that technology was really frowned on for the most part over the years, right? By all people, different levels of people. Too much technology. Well, in my view, technology has saved us this go round with COVID, right? And I can tell you that prior to us getting COVID, we held prayer sessions on Zoom. My niece, who was the nurse, she had COVID first. And we held prayer sessions like this with her family, with her children. And we did private prayer sessions on Zoom. And it became really popular. We'd hold our health here at Stolo Nation, created a bigger Zoom session for us. And we had people from up the north, northern British Columbia, from the States, all over, people joining our prayer sessions because it helped them. Singing our traditional songs. What are you doing when you do that? Is you're bringing the minds and the hearts of the people together. We say, Latzamat, Latzathala, one mind, one heart. Eta mata, eta thala, good mind and a good heart. Hom tamata, hom tathala, tashkwalawan, a strong mind and a strong heart with good feelings. And growing up, I learned that I could do everything backwards. But in my grandmother's eyes, I could do no wrong. It's that you're doing something. And that strong mind, strong heart, what does that mean? That means standing up and doing what you need to do in a good way. Your intention is important. And that's the first thing the elders would ask you is, why do you want to do this? I know I was hauled in front of the elders for years. Why do you want to do this? Your intention is so important. And that it's done to Shkolowan in a good way. So that's what we did. We couldn't gather together, but we could come together under Zoom. And the other is people would stand in our yard, that distance. Or we'd go to one of the homes where a loved one was, or outside the hospital room with masks on and distancing, and share our traditional songs. And if I learned anything, it's this, is that the spirit doesn't know distance or time. That those feelings that you have can be shared around the world. And that's why prayer is so important. Front and center, that's who we are. We're spiritual people, and we're guided as such. And again, that's why the elders, that's why we were not verbal. If you ask a question, quieten your mind. I know my grandmother would say, how are you going to learn? How are you going to think about what you've seen today if this is going all the time? How are you going to think about what you heard today if this is going all the time? So I teach that to my grandchildren and to students over the years, right? So being prayerful, in my view, is really where our families and our communities, where resilience comes in. Where do you get your answers from? I think one of the powerful things that I learned over the years and what's really important, just as our other dear speaker shared as well, is being able to take what you know and share that. And she's offered some answers to schools or to communities. And my grandmother said that to me as well. What you know and what you understand, it has no value unless you share it. And I believe we call that best practice. What's best practice? And when you're down, whether it's in your mind, whether you're struggling, whether it's a physical ailment, when you're weak, spirit is strong. Know that. So I couldn't even barely stand up. And my husband and I, we have separate rooms because we just sleep better that way. We learned that over the years. But I made my way to his room. Held his hand and we prayed. And that feeling you get when you really connect with spirit, when you truly connect with spirit, no one can give it to you. You can't buy it, but it's free. And you can have that anywhere. In your room, in your office, when you're running, on a bus, on a plane. You can connect with spirit anywhere. And that's really what our elders want for our families and our communities. The ceremonies that we do here in our Stalo traditions doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. The ceremonies that exist where my grandson is from in Siksika doesn't exist anywhere else in the world. all of our nations have our own way of prayer and ceremony, but it all means the same thing. It's a connection to spirit. And you could be alone and hurt and struggling. And if you connect to spirit, truly connect to spirit, that feeling will come over you. It's just like covering you. And I can remember the first time that happened. And I was personally struggling with an illness. And I was expecting one of my children. And I was really, really, really sick. And there was nothing the doctors could do. And both my husband and I returned to our ceremonies just a year or two before that. And I was so sick. Anyway, in the middle of the night, he came and he was so worried about me. And I slept. I'd leave our room and go downstairs because I didn't want to wake him up because I never slept for days because I was so sick. And he came and he scared me because he was kneeling in front of me before I knew he was there. It was dark. And he said, "I'm so worried about you." And I said, "I'm worried about me too." And he said, "Let's pray." And both of us were raised in the Catholic Church as well. And we moved away from the church. I did, especially once I found out about residential schools and what they did to my mom and my grandma. I was so angry. But we stumbled through Our Father, the Catholic, we're Catholics. And he was holding my hand, and it was dark, and we both started to pray. And then I felt this warmth go through my whole body. And he said, "Did you feel that?" And I said, "Yeah, did you?" And I said, "Let's go to bed before the sickness comes back." And we went and I laid down and I woke up the next day. The curtains were open and sun was shining, and it was Sunday morning, and he came, he said, "Let's go to church." So we went. And we hadn't been to church for years, and we didn't know the whole church system changed. You take confession on Friday nights because they have back-to-back mass. And the priest was standing outside the door saying goodbye to people and welcoming people. And we walked up to him and he said, "Father, can you hear our confession?" And he was looking at us, and you could tell looking at us, and he knew he had to do this. He said, "Come with me." He brought us to the front of the church into his area of the chapel, private area, and did confession for us. Then we went out. And there, their way we held up mass, people were waiting. And people were looking at us, and we're going, "What's going on here?" And we realized that we interrupted the mass and the way things go, but the kindness that the priest extended to us. Why do I share that? Because I want people to know that it doesn't matter how you pray. And I learned that it was not God and Jesus that did that to our people. It was people. using the church for their own means, and that we have to address that. But I want prayer for people. And for some of us, it's church. For some of us, it's our longhouse. For some of us, it's our sweat lodge. For some of us, it's running. For some of us, it's on our traditional canoes. It doesn't matter how you pray. But I want people to make that connection to spirit, to be complete. And I'll give you this image of a person, a whole person. And again, our speaker before us shared that, the mind, the body, and the spirit. So you have a whole person, the mind, the body, the spirit, and it's your energy that brings all of those together. But if there's something wrong with your mind, it impacts your body and your spirit. Something wrong with your spirit, it impacts your mind and your body. Something wrong with your body, it impacts again, or your all three impact one another. So for your mind, you talk to somebody. For your spirit, you learn to pray. For your body, you have control over that. Exercise, eating our traditional foods. Some people eat and eat and eat, and they say, I can't satisfy my hunger. I don't know why I can't. I feel like I have to eat, eat, eat. I'm not getting full. You need your traditional foods. For those people that live by the ocean, they need their shellfish. For those that live in the mountains, they probably need their elk meat or deer meat. For us here, it's our salmon. We're salmon people. So your mind, your body, and your spirit make up who you are. And that whole notion of your energy, the loss of energy gets impacted by trauma. So if you've been hit, it impacts you and you lose part of your energy. So I want that image with the residential school era in mind. They took away our ability to think. They took away our spirituality. They abused our bodies. What do you have standing in front of you but a shell of a person? But what I want people to understand is this. If you forget everything else I said, is while people can control your mind, while people will try and control your spirituality or what you eat and drink, right? There's one thing that man cannot control, and that's spirit. All of that was taken away from us. And I know because I grew up in that era when there was nothing that reflected who we were. No ceremonies, no regalia, nothing. And in my generation, it has all come back. In my generation, I've witnessed firsthand our ceremonies coming back. Our sweat lodges, our longhouses, our regalia. And we're doing, and I guess what I think about is those spiritual people that understood this, because in our stories, our spiritual people prophesized all of this. They told us there'd be many losses. They told us that there was men coming in black dresses. But they also told us we'd take our rightful place. And they said it would be when the man lands on the moon, when the eagle lands on the moon, we'd take our rightful place. We'll turn back to our traditions and our ceremonies and take our rightful place. And be the fourth generation. And I am the fourth generation. And I remember 1969 when that eagle landed on the moon. The first words back to Earth was, "The eagle has landed." Can you imagine how excited our spiritual people were? It doesn't mean everything changes overnight, but it does mean that we're taking our place, doing what we're supposed to be doing. And that's my final message to each one of you. Am I done at 11:30? Can you confirm, Claire?
Yes, it's at 11.
Okay.
Yeah.
My final message to each and every one of you is you are doing what you're supposed to be doing. You are where you're supposed to be at. Claire, thank you for what you're doing. Maureen, thank you for what you're doing. I want to thank each and every one of you for what you are doing. And that we can collectively come together with technology and share and take care of one another, because at the end of the day, that's all we have is one another. So I'm really grateful to be a part of this. I hope that what I shared is going to help and make a difference. I really want folks to continue to wash your hands, mask up. Please get the vaccine. Imagine we could be out of this pandemic if everyone came together to iatholitol and to iatholitol title ATIS. I thank you for your good work and wishing everyone the best. Hi, Tim.